Welcome to this episode of In Conversation with Reason to Be. This is the second of 3 mini podcasts on developing new habits. I'm Keith Goddard and I'm joined by my colleague Aurea Fellows. So in the first podcast, if you heard it, we talked about deciding on what behaviours you wanted to establish or what new routines you wanted to have. This podcast, we're going to look at the second part of the habit formation loop. We're going to look at reward and cravings. So how do you reinforce the behaviour that you're doing to get yourself to do it over and over again? So Aurea, have you got any top tips for the listeners on choosing or establishing rewards and cravings?
I think the first thing that comes to mind for me, Keith, when it comes to reward is it has to be something you can do immediately. So, you've got to do it straight away because that's going to reinforce the feeling of success of whenever you've taken the step, you've done the behaviour. It's got to be something you can do straight away. And also, therefore, it needs to be something that you can do all the time, because to start with, it really is little and often, and making sure that we're reinforcing it by regularly making sure that we've got a reward. So nothing that's too elaborate, really. And also something we can do in the context that we're going to be doing the behaviour in. Something that's going to fit, particularly if it's something where we're out and about rather than at home, or we're not always in an environment that we can control. And the types of things that I think work well for lots of different people would be things like either having a little chart whereby you sort of have a star every time you do it, and then at the end of the week, you've got 7 stars and you get, whatever it is for you, whether it's, a glass of beer or a bit of chocolate or something else that you find is like a bit of a treat. Or something literally in the moment, like a bit of a fist pump or a virtual kind of high five, that says, woo, done it. Or for those people that, like the sort of social connection, sending a text to someone who might be the kind of person who's your kind of cheerleader, to say, yep, I've done it for today, and you get a little thumbs up back from them or something. As you know, I'm a real list person, Keith. So for me, it's actually very rewarding for me to tick something off as having been done. So if you're a list kind of person, that will resonate. If you're not, it completely won't. And I think, therefore, that's probably the last thing I would add, is that it does have to be something that feels properly rewarding to you. You need to know what works for you, rather than picking things that might generically be seen as rewards. That's obviously, I think, quite important in that immediate rewards kind of camp, because it's helpful early on for us to keep on the right track, with something that's very immediate. But I suppose the other thing I was thinking about in terms of reward was more that craving side that you touched on there, as well as part of the habit formation. So how would you suggest, Keith, on that craving part of things, we can tap into that to help with the behaviour change?
I think the cravings thing for me, I always anchor it is the why of your behaviour and the why of your habits. So I think you've done a really good way of explaining the immediate rewarding of the behaviour, which gets you to do it over and over again. I think longer term, and even initially, to think about, so why do I want to do this in the first place? So we know things like chocolate, alcohol, other maybe less legal substances might give us an instant why, an instant craving, which is a chemical and biological one. But that's not true of other behaviours, I guess. So for me, I think at the front end is thinking about, why am I doing this in the first place? So if you think about fitness as a overall goal, and when you break it down to your behaviours, why do you want to get fit in the first place? So, for those that listen to the first podcast, my sort of fitness campaign, wanting to be healthy, no moves, all that type of stuff. So what's that about? What's the craving I'm feeding? And it could be multifaceted for some people. So for me, there's an absolute desire to feel fit. I like the feeling, the physical feeling of being strong and fit, which is not going to be true of everybody. And I think that talks to what you were saying about the immediate rewards of being personal to you. But I like that feeling. And perversely or bizarrely, whilst initially doing press-ups are really painful and really difficult, the immediate feeling afterwards for me is, one, quite rewarding, but I quite like the feeling in my body of my muscles been exercised and tested. So there's an absolute physical reaction that I enjoy, and that's a bit of a craving for me. I think there's also just for me of I don't think I'm a vain person. Other people might say different, but I quite like feeling and looking good, not to other people, but to myself. So within that, there's a whole host of cravings that I guess I'm trying to feed. And I think the important thing for people is to try and really anchor. So what fundamentally is it about? And there may be a hierarchy within cravings. But it's spending time at the front end of establishing your behavior to say, right, what am I trying to feed ultimately? And if you look at the exercise one, for some people, it may be an absolute social craving that people are feeding. So actually, for people that are really sociable, need to be around people, when they go out running, when they go out cycling, actually, one of the big important things is their social contact, which is a craving they're feeding, and they're getting it through the act of cycling, for example, so cycling clubs. So I guess it's tapping into the why, which is the craving bit. And as I said, some cravings are instantly met. So coffee, alcohol, smoking, they're feeding that, but we're not necessarily always in that game. And I think the cravings I've been talking about are really about the longer term aims and goals. And I think those can be a little bit abstract. So I guess one of the ways to try and think about that in terms of coming back to the reward bit is trying to measure how close you're getting to that craving feeling. So, if it's about achievement, how many press-ups can you do on day 1 versus on day 10, day 11, day 12? So you can measure your progress to achievement, which might be a craving. It may be how you're looking. So are you looking trimmer? Are you looking more toned? So that could be important with regards to a craving. Are you feeling actually stronger? So there's a measurement bit. So, you mentioned your lists are in all the ticks. So you could count up how many times you've done your press-ups, how many you've achieved. So there's a just achievement bit. But actually, it's maybe how you feel as a result of being able to do those. So are you feeling stronger as a result of doing the activity? So all of those are feeding cravings outside of the instant rewards that you were talking about. So it's part of the bigger plan, really. And for me, the two need to be connected, but they may not be connected right at the front end of you doing it. So the instant rewards you were talking about are more important at the front end, but you've got to have sort of a bit of a sense of what monster are you trying to feed, which is the why and the cravings bit. If that sort of brings it to life for people.
Yeah, because what was coming to mind to me then when you were talking, Keith, was a number of the kind of clients I work with often what they want is to feel more energetic. And ultimately it's about having energy to be able to do other things. So actually the craving is about feeling that I can actually do lots of things that I at the moment perhaps don't feel like I can, but that takes a while. Before we get to that point, we have to be able to sort of keep ourselves on track. And I think experimentation is important when it comes to those immediate rewards as well. So I think, sometimes if we pick something, we might persist with it doggedly because we think it should be the right reward. But, actually, if we've not chosen something that's quite right, we're actually undermining our whole effort to try and, make it something that's rewarding and enjoyable. And I think also the point I was making before about, is it something that will work in any context? So I know that for me, having a cup of tea is normally like a universal reward that I can use. But if you're doing something where you're out and about, you can't, because you can't always know, especially at the moment, you might not be able to get a cup of tea anywhere. So I know I've tried that a few times because I know it's a good reward, but then I've fallen foul of the context thing. And I think also, when you were talking about the whole kind of chocolate and things like that as well, I know that's another one where there's been a lot of experimentation for me with that one, because as I mentioned previously, when I've sort of sought to stop eating gluten and I was able to achieve that in my evening meal, then my reward was, if you have a gluten-free evening meal, you can have a square of dark chocolate. But then I realized my dark chocolate consumption was getting slightly out of hand. So I decided actually what I'd do is more of a tally towards some chocolate at the end of the week rather than it being like every day. And I guess it's just being prepared to experiment, being prepared to try things out, drop things if they're not working, think about something else. I certainly know when I was getting into a good habit around a gratitude journal before bed, I tried a number of things to try and reinforce it, and nothing was really making it very rewarding. And then I just realised that actually one of the things I do before I go to sleep always is I read a couple of chapters of a book. I find it very relaxing. It's and I just realised that for me that was the reward. If I did my gratitude journal, then I could read my chapters, and actually it was something that always worked because it was in the right context at the right time. And I was actually overthinking it in terms of trying to find a reward, whereas actually just pegging it to something that I did genuinely like doing, which didn't require any other additional activity, was all I needed to do in terms of my sort of mindset. So I think it's just about mixing it up, seeing what works, not persisting with stuff that's not working, and just trying things out, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that experimentation piece, I think, is quite important for people to play around with the intrinsic rewards, not the intrinsic, so the immediate rewards, and get what works and have some flexibility with that as well. And I think it's also trying to experiment and figure out what the craving is as well, because it's not always the first thing you think it might be. So you may think it's actually, the 2 dark squares of chocolate that you're after. In actual fact, it might not be. It might be something completely different. So I think part of it is figuring out what's the itch I'm trying to scratch with this new behaviour. And I think, the thing that strikes me is that we, as human beings, we're fairly predictable animals. So we know there's going to be some psychological cravings that may be useful to think about. There's some biological cravings and some physical cravings. So if you think about sort of those as 3 big territories, I guess, within the psychological needs, some people it's about being connected and being sociable. So is the craving something around having human contact? Is it something about getting good at stuff? So there's a craving for mastery and getting good at stuff. So if you're trying to, get good at knitting, for example, there might be a craving as opposed to knitting with others. I'm not learning to knit, by the way, just in case anybody thinks I am. And sometimes it's about control as well, and being independent and being a master of your own destiny, I guess. So there's some psychological things to think about, but also just some of the biological aspects that we might be feeding, but also the physical. I've talked a little bit about the physical cravings around my fitness campaign. So for me, is it about the physical feeling that I like, when I'm getting fit and getting stronger? Is it about the physical sensation of doing 60 press-ups, and what that actually does? So those 2 are 2 physical cravings I could be feeding. Question is, are they both equal or are they both separate? But equally, for me, not compared to others, for me, there's an aesthetic thing of how do I look? So the whole no moobs bit, is what do I look like? Don't get me wrong, I don't spend hours looking in the mirror, because
it sounds like you do, to be honest, Keith.
Well, I do, but it's one of those mirrors that you get in the sort of circuses and comedy stores, so that might be part of the issue, really. But I guess for me, there's a bit around just really, so again, it comes back to some of the things I said before, is understanding what is it that will drive my behaviour most and what am I aiming for. So I think part of it's just understanding what the strength is, and I think the reality is you may be feeding 2 cravings at the same time, which is fine. I think the cuteness with tying rewards to your behaviour is what will get you to do the behaviour more and more, so your brain takes over and it becomes automatic. I think that's the cuteness of getting those immediate rewards and the craving, which is the why, right? So hopefully that gives people a sense of just setting rewards up, both the immediate reinforcing rewards to get you to go next time, but also the keeping going over time and moving towards success and the craving. So that's sort of the end of podcast 2, I guess, which is the rewards piece. The next podcast is going to look at cues and triggers, which is the third of the podcasts, and it's actually the thing that our brain tunes into first. So thanks very much for listening. Hope you've enjoyed it and hope it's been useful.